We are coming to a part of the seminar that requires very, very earnest application on your part to comprehend. I'm going to, in the absence of the anatomical brain itself, I'm going to try and, by drawings and description, show you what part of the brain is involved in the location of MWOL, meditative way of life's effects, what science is now calling the intrinsic activity of the brain. It's worth noting these words down so that you can start picking up any scientific magazine as well as ordinary magazines like Nature and observing how science is grasping these new revolutionary ideas that have belonged to ancient wisdom for thousands of years. Annie Besant was probably the brightest amongst the theosophists of her time. She was a brilliant woman who championed working women in factories, who needed a leader, who needed a spokesman, who needed people who were well informed to show them what to do. She also had an esoteric group, and Annie Besant, bringing them to her study for conversation, would give them an exercise to do. And the exercise has relevance to what we are talking about here today. The capacity to pick up things that the eye can quite often lose and miss and may even distort. And when her students would walk into her study, she would insist that they observe carefully what they had around them. She had lots of knickknacks, of course, because of India and theosophy and so on. And at the end of their discussion or meeting, she would ask them, "What have you seen in this room?" And they would struggle through a list of things that they had noted. And it was very important because they were entering new planes, especially now that they had suddenly become theosophists and were earning the good karma that comes from being a theosophist. If you are a theosophist, you know what theosophy also teaches. They also serve who merely pay their fees, as I learned. Well, anyway, she had this very powerful capacity to observe, and so she taught people to note what was going on around them, so that even when they were in the dream state, they could note what was occurring in the dreams, especially if the dream was exaggerated. And so her young students learnt to observe very carefully under all circumstances, and their circumstances changed because they were on the path. And she encouraged a spiritual diary because writing something down, you're very careful not to lie to yourself. And keeping a spiritual diary tends to require very, very circumscribed descriptions that you don't exaggerate or you don't minimize the experiences you are having. She herself, of course, became an important political leader in India. It is said that Annie Besant, more than any Westerner, gave India more impetus towards independence than anybody else in the West. Oh yes, just remembered. I want the two maps to do with the human heart, please. You know what they are, meter size. You can put one up here. If you want to use one of my bulldog clips, you can use. It was she that pointed out in one of her most important books, A Study in Consciousness, could be. Anyway, she pointed out the origin of the sinus node, the sinoatrial node, which I'm going to show you on a big map of the heart, as a very important the anatomical point around which the heart is established, and the first rhythms of the heart begin to occur at about 6 weeks in the baby when it is born. About 6 weeks, because I hadn't planned this as part of the talk. What have we got? There are two. I want the sinoatrial node. Here's the right atrium, and there is the sinus node in the wall of the right atrium. So we're looking at a structure that was unknown, and is still unknown to science, as having an origin. The etiology of the impulse that begins in the sinus node of the heart with a rhythm. And the rhythm becomes the heartbeat. And yesterday I revealed or pointed out that Annie Besant had said that the impulse is directly linked to the sun. And the sun, our sun somehow or the other activates the sinoatrial node, which is partly muscular and partly nervous in its nature. And so I think that, and I have taught, that it's almost certainly likely to be related to the neutrino. Neutrinos are pouring in hundreds of millions into the Earth, our planet. And of course we have thousands of different species, and probably affects the 3 kingdoms of nature. Probably affects the plant kingdom, especially the flowering kingdom of plants. Also affects animals, especially mammals, and the apes, and affects the human kingdom through the sinus node, and probably through many other aspects of the human aura, because our aura suggests a sun, and we ourselves have a center of our sun, our own sun, which is the heart. And the sinus node thumps, 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 thumps right throughout our lives, and we need it. And it is said that the thumping heart operates through a cord of life. And when we die, there are 2 cords in the body that are affected profoundly and are terminated. One cord is anchored to the heart, probably the sinus node, and when there is a clear termination of life force in the body, the life cord is broken. And there is also a consciousness cord, which is probably linked to the gland, pineal gland, yes. The pineal gland, and experts in the Middle Ages talked about the pineal gland being the anchorage of the soul. Well, consciousness has a cord and is linked to that area of the midbrain. Midbrain, I'm going to show you what the midbrain is in a moment. But the midbrain is also the site of MWOL for those who are capable of living the meditative way of life. And when death occurs, true death occurs, there is the breaking also of the consciousness thread or cord. But of course, sometimes only one of the cords break at once. By that I mean at the same moment as the other. And so there might appear to be death, no life existing in a form, but consciousness may persist. And so a person may sometimes be in the mortuary, being made ready for burial, and still be conscious. And the cause of it is that for some reason or the other, consciousness persists even though there is no life force flowing. There's enough life in the body as it lies for the consciousness still to persist. One of the problems of this is that there are certain human beings who live on in consciousness after death. And there are certain causes of this. And some people are susceptible to these spirits, dead beings, dead humans, who nevertheless manifest consciousness and endeavor to hook themselves onto some very lively person. It has to be a very lively person who in his rages, in his joys, and in his devotions may emit a life energy or consciousness energy which assists such spirits. And Madame Blavatsky spoke of them. She spoke of discarnate beings and warned of them, not meaning to terrify or upset, but they are there. Dead beings who exist still in consciousness without form and are able and want to hook on to, because of their desire to reincarnate, and they have lost the opportunity of it. They wish to continue some sort of existence and hook onto a personality. And there's a certain part of the body which they can hook onto and act as a second kind of intelligence to a well-meaning person treading the path, anxious to explore himself or herself as she has the energy emitted from that body and taken up by a discarnate being and capable not of any creativeness, impossible for them, but capable of giving typical answers that that person might make in ordinary everyday life. You have to ponder on this. Don't throw it back at me as a question. Go and look at Madame Blavatsky's observation of it. If, however, it became a nuisance to the person who is deliberately probing the astral world, then perhaps I might be able to offer some advice. Now, how the hell did I get involved in that? Well, this is part of the reality of treading the path. Some people are, as Alice Bailey called them, over-enthusiastic and barge in and grab at anything. And, of course, the people who are trying to reach mescaline experiences and so on, psychedelic experiences, may fall prone to them. And that's part of the reason why I advise against anybody playing with or experimenting with previews of life after death. Don't do it. Right, so now I'm more or less in a position to start to talk about the matter of where the MWOL, meditative way of life, expresses itself in the brain and where it is likely to pick up dark energy, more or less, and it's not established yet, dark energy, perhaps coming from the Milky Way. There is a lot of energy, dark energy, mental energy, coming from the Milky Way to one of its planets, one of its solar systems. Our sun is one of the suns that have stars which has emerged from our Milky Way. But whether the dark energy may, for some individuals, pass through the heart of the sun to us, as is suggested by Alice Bailey, or whether some of it may even be sublimated by passing through the central spiritual sun, and she describes the kind of energy as electric fire before it reaches its initiates on the earth, has yet to be established. That doesn't mean what I believe. It means that it needs to be established like Scientific American has established the theosophical principle of a mental body, a mental aura, and mental energy. Please don't label me with everything, though I have investigated just about everything. I'm happy to help people who show discrimination in what they are dealing with. Oh, I deal with a medium, they will say, and the medium told me this, and therefore it must be true. You find an old couple have fought all their lives with each other. Then he dies. She wouldn't believe a damn word while he was alive, but now he said, oh, he's her master, and he keeps her informed, and she has pinned her spiritual hopes on her dead husband. That sort of nonsense you want to watch out for. If you want to attach the rest of your competent life, creative life, to things like that, then you'll get what you deserved, and it's karmic in origin. You must be able to bring me back to where I was. Oh yes, we were going to start talking about the midbrain, which is the site of MWOL, or intrinsic inputs of energy. Always be forgiving to your teachers. One of the reasons why I have been more or less successful in the esoteric has been my respect for my teachers, even at university. All right, we're going to look at the origin of the brain. The brain begins as a tube. The first thing that appears in the egg is the tube of the spine, your spine. And then the tube begins to bulge. It begins to bulge at the head, like that, possibly because of the anatomical structure of the sperm. It begins to bulge. And the next thing that happens is that the bulges begin to grow and grow and grow into the forebrain, left and right, like that, leaving the spine behind, and an area at the top of the spine between the bulges, which is called the midbrain, And they grow further and further because we are human, and they bulge into massive hemispheres, the right and left hemisphere. There it is, and the midbrain grows with it, and we have the two cerebral hemispheres. Sorry if that one's not meant to be smaller. The two cerebral hemispheres, and then looking on the brain as from the side, as it were, we begin to note that this part of the brain, which is called the midbrain here, this part of the spinal cord, which is called the midbrain, lying between the cerebral hemispheres, looking at it side on, we have the pineal gland sprouts there between the hemispheres, and more anteriorly you get the pituitary area ending in the pituitary gland there, and so we have a midbrain. And so I'm doing all this to help you to understand, looking at it on the top, or the reverse, the posterior part of the midbrain here. Here's the midbrain, has the pineal gland on it, and the front has the anterior has the pituitary. All right. Naughty boys like Douglas Baker, following these ancient propositions, thought of the pituitary gland as a male and as the pineal gland as a uterus, because in this region there was evidence of dark energy somehow or the other, sponsoring, feeding in a spiritual, what do you call it, endometrium, got it, girls, is able to disseminate spiritual thoughts, such as the Red Cross movement of Florence Nightingale. Got it? Not tiny little personality thoughts, but thoughts that are huge and capable of affecting humanity. And having women to nurse wounded soldiers was obviously a helpful thing, and they blessed hospitals. Whereas the pituitary gland, more of a phallus than a uterus, has the capacity to project an idea into the consciousness of others. The ability to think how your neighbor is thinking, think how your husband is thinking, a form of, what do you call it? Empathy, of course. See how students can help. Even in old age, you can call on students and they have holds of things that you once threw around with ease. And the combination of these two are spiritually creative factors which still lurk in the consciousness of advanced humanity. Now we will come to the site of MWOL, which is clearly in the midbrain. And what I'm talking about at the moment is, this is the midbrain here. This is the medulla. Anyway, the midbrain is there, and it has got reaches into the wall, the inside wall of each of the cerebral hemispheres. So I'm going to mark those. I'm going to mark them and say that the inside wall of the cerebral hemispheres at the level, all right, at this level, there you have the tube going up that I've been drawing, but at this level, this goes right down into the tube, and the medial means this part here, the inner part of the brain, hidden by the other hemisphere, but at the height of the parietal lobes, which is round about here, is the reception area for MWOL. Another important area now very recently noted is the area which is called the prefrontal cortex. This whole surface here is the cortex of the brain. Here is the frontal lobe, and just behind, probably more on the medial inside of the brain that I've just demonstrated and shown and read, is an area which is wide open to what's the word we've just had? Feeling for others. Empathy. Also input of Buddhic qualities, registering, being capable of living at Buddhic levels and beginning to grow, or disseminate is a better word, to demonstrate Atma Buddhi and Manas. So you have two areas of the brain, and you know how they originate. So that is very valuable information. It has been to me, and it probably will be to you. And these two areas you must regard. What does the scientific papers say? Listen to this. This area, what I call MOL, where the meditational way of life, MW, meditative way of life, is initiated, is called by science medial mystery parietal area. The medial mystery parietal area And that's in this paper. The intrinsic area, if you like, if you feel better with that. I can't help. You know, names, vocabulary changes, but according to fashion, as well as to whatever the papers, the media are taking up for the moment. But this paper I will, in fact, if you're very kind to some of the staff here, you can ask for and make a little donation, and they may even run it out for you. Run it off a copy. It's only 5 pages. Everything that I have said is in black and white, not exactly as I say it, but in the way that science is wanting to say it now without losing its pride. Who would like to ask me questions that are relevant to the subject? Yes, oh yes, Marco. In English, please. So can you do it through anybody speak Italian? Who? Did somebody? Oh, you can put it in English. Stand up. Yes. Come and point to it, please. Yes, why not? No. Advante. Advante.
I'm not sure it's not so important.
Advante. Point out on the drawing what it is you're trying to say.
This shape, especially this one, it reminds me...
I never saw it. Hang on.
Sorry.
All right, let's see it. Yes, the pineal and the pituitary glands, yeah?
It reminds me the shape of Uranus, the glyph.
The pineal gland is like a female uterus.
So does it fit?
It's like a female uterus.
Yes, it depends on...
Uranus. Oh, you want me to... All right, thank you for that. At least
I don't know if...
I know what you're after. You want me to point out the symbology of the planet Uranus. Well, there's Uranus. It is a man standing appraising the sun. And his job is to build an antahkarana through the neck chakra, the throat chakra, to start building a mental pulling energy in the way that I've suggested through dark energy and the galaxy, pulling energy in so that an antahkarana can be built to a world that also creates, like this device here, the human phallus is meant to create. It creates at the lower level, and it is the woman that plays the greatest part in the creation of the human baby. It's her body, as I taught the other day. Yes, it's the woman that donates the flesh and blood of the baby and has the opportunity to raise it according to her wishes for the first, the Catholics say 7 years. We would say that in view of the high delinquency rate of English kids, we would say it until about 17 or 18, which is the age when most boys, I can only speak for boys, at 17 integrate an astral body. And that's when they begin to throw off their parents. I can do better than you. Your advice is no good to me. I want advice that I can use amongst my... and all that sort of thing. And so the change, the opportunity comes when higher senses begin to operate, when boys, youths, men begin to do nice things like empathy, nice things like being able to account for what their behavior is. It has a reason for it being like it is. I can give an account of my behavior because this and this happened, and my father died when I was young, and because of this and that. And that is called narrative. It's the quality of narrative. I was telling kids, younger and older than myself, boys at boarding school. I was telling them stories. If you read my book, new book, push the book. If you read the new book, how I had the ability somehow to tell stories. Now this has a modern relevance, a very important modern relevance. The new head of the Royal Institute was a woman, appointed by the Queen, the oldest scientific body in the world, functioned beautifully, famous names in it. But they put Susan Greenfield in charge of it, and she was a revolutionary, bright, modern figure, a woman in charge of the Royal Institute, and the Queen made her a baroness, Baroness Greenfield. And she has pointed out something very relevant to this. She has said that boys who play computer games give most of their attention. Remember what I told you about attention? Do you remember that? Yes, at the top of the Grecian columns, focus of attention, that boys who focus on computer games lose the capacity for narrative. They can't tell a story about how they grew up, why they can't explain any previous history to anything. It's all taken up with the present. The present, the present, the present. The person is murdered. There's no explanation for how he will have suffered before he committed the murder, or how he suffers if he does commit a murder, go to jail for life. There is no narrative for the future. There is no narrative in the past. It is deprived from boys. I don't know about girls. It's lost to boys who are ever on the computer watching games when they could be out in the world of experience and learning how things start, how they get a headache, how the breathing can be affected by this or that. Experience, war experience, teaching experience, and so on. If they have that, that's normal. The Romans loved the normal narrative experience that they had, and our children should have today. But if it's all sucked away and destroyed or barred or so on, and so they lack narrative experience, she says, you will get delinquency. And she's been through several universities. She's also talked about things like maims. Anybody know anything about maims? How certain language descriptions can fossilize, can become fossils, and can last over lives, so that babies learning language very rapidly indeed are able to draw on these fossil structures of language themselves, maybe through their parents unwittingly, and so pick up language in a fantastically fast. I could go on all night about. Anyway, she was very bright, and she tried to introduce her ideas there, and just like a typical new wife, wants to clean up the establishment. And so she said, we've got to clean this establishment up, this Royal Institute. We need columns here, and we need wider lecture rooms, and we need this, and a wider public, and so on. And the old fossils in the Institute, who believed in classical physics and no change from their historical brilliance, kicked her out. But she had ideas, psychological ideas like the one I've just described, where boys with knives, dare I use a colour word here and be called a racist, muggers, black muggers, who pull knives on you and so on. It is often related again to this factor of being tied to the present, not reviewing the past. Oh, what would happen if who else did? No, there's no past then, there's no future. What can happen if I do this bad thing? No, that's gone. They're just interested in a story or a game that lasts in the present, and the ability to create narrative is not there. And it especially affects those who can pull a knife and use it, not knowing what terrible circumstances it will lay him in if he uses it and kills somebody. They don't get the opportunity because they have no examples of it. And so there are strange things coming out. Now I'm going to tell you one more before you are allowed to have your lunch. One more story. This is the picture of the... This is the picture of the New York Philharmonic Orchestra that may be related through the White House and its advisors who are related to... This is from Scientific American. It's valid, or it wouldn't be put there. There must be evidence for it. And probably through a scientific advisor has got to the White House long before this was published. And the White House has reacted to it at a Foreign Office level. And they have thought, he talks about it, this man talks about comparing the brain and the new meditation way of life. He has talked about it and how it has been necessary for they to compare the MWOL intrinsic part of the brain with a band, with an orchestra. They do it in here. I told you right at the beginning, I've taken it from here. So they do it with an orchestra, and they may have initiated this factor and supported, possibly, that the New York Philharmonic Orchestra leader, a very compassionate man, a very empathetic man, could be sent with his orchestra if an invitation could come from North Korea, which had been condemned by President Bush as an infamous axis, part of an infamous axis. And so he went, and he was a rip-snorting success. And no matter what has happened since then, you know there's nearly been a fight or a squabble over a lost warship by South Korea. And it was settled. So it may be that this extraordinary act related in Scientific American and elucidated by Douglas may have been a factor in lifting something discovered about the brain and its behavior, sublimated to a higher level, politically, the use of it politically. And tonight, when I present a subject in which we sublimate our symbols, you will see the reason why it's important to know the nursery rhyme meaning when we are young of something like Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, meaning Humpty Dumpty types were egg-like people who had very powerful but strong, potent in that an egg can turn into a chicken, and a chicken into so on. So it is possible that we can sublimate some of the qualities that we learn in nursery rhymes, in symbols. 3 blind mice, see how they run. They all run after the farmer's wife. Do you ever see such a thing in your life as 3 blind mice? There's a meaning to it. See no evil, hear no evil, taste no... I don't know what they are today, but there they are. The 3 blind mice, which takes you on to the story of the elephant and the Raja, the prince, the Raja, that heard there were 3 blind Hindus passing through the town. And he thought to himself, I must have a look at them. and he ordered them into his courtyard where there was this huge elephant. And he knew that none of them had ever been in touch with an elephant before. And so he had them directed to the elephant, and each one of the 3 blind Hindus was asked what he interpreted in front of him. Yes, some of you have heard it, but there are some who haven't heard it. And so the one blind Hindu came up to the elephant and felt it, and he felt the tusks. Oh, he said, this is a spear. Second blind Hindu came up to the elephant and felt the body of the elephant. No, he said, it's not a spear, it's a wall. And the third blind Hindu came up to the elephant and felt its tail, and he said, you're both wrong, it's a rope. But collectively they had a better idea. And collectively, often subjectively, groups can get a better idea. Doctors of medicine have been taught since time immemorial. If you're unsure about a diagnosis, get somebody of your own level and consult with somebody else about the condition. And these are the principles that we should learn about when we are treading the path, because the path can be a very, very awkward and dangerous thing. And people shy away because they lack courage when they needn't have had the courage anyway, or they don't shy away when they should. We need to learn from each other, and there's a brilliant literature recorded on this planet by men and women who have suffered immeasurably through accepting the challenges of the path of unfoldment. Don't forget these things. Put them in your spiritual diary and brood over them, and you'll find they will grow. And just write this one down as well. Energy follows thought. Energy follows thought. Energy follows thought. And if you bring your attention to something, it's called in science the Goldilocks phenomenon. The Goldilocks phenomenon, where there is enough people pondering on something. Geldof, didn't he do something with music around the world? So the whole world was playing or singing music, and that was a collective thing. And if we put these things together, and that's why we're constantly told, find a place where you can sit and meditate and brood and ponder and have time to allow your brain to unravel. Thank you very much.